So just a few years ago, shortly actually after the attack on the Tree of Life Synagogue, I had a very serious conversation with a rabbi friend on the subject of quote-unquote looking Jewish. And when I say looking Jewish, I'm not actually talking about genetic or stereotypes, because both of us as rabbis are aware that Jews come in all shapes and colors and sizes and ethnicities, but rather the act of appearing explicitly, visibly aligned with the faith of Judaism. And for me, this was actually my norm, because I had been wearing a kippah every single day at that point for the better part of a decade. But for my friend and my colleague, it was not. His synagogue was a true classical reform synagogue, which meant robes often, a talit never, and a kippah on the bima to be taken off immediately once services were done. Wearing something that every single day said, "I am Jewish," was not and never had been part of his daily practice. And he was torn. "Are you still going to wear your kippah?" he asked me. And before I could even get a word out, he said, "Because I'm starting to think about wearing one all the time. I want people to know that I'm here, and I want people to know that I'm not afraid." And that was part of the general sentiment of the time, this feeling that we needed to publicly identify as Jewish as a direct rebuttal to anti-Semitism. And like many short-lived social movements, it came and it went, and the vast majority of folks who took up the cause physically, not just changing their profile picture on social media, went back to normal fairly quickly. And my colleague was actually a perfect example. He wore his kippah for a few weeks in and around town, and then he stopped. And he stopped because it wasn't really him, and it wasn't his way of being a committed Jewish leader. And that was entirely okay. And during our coffee time, a few weeks after he stopped wearing the kippah every day, he wanted to chat about his experience. He told me he had felt an incredible pressure because he was identifiably Jewish. The way that people looked at him, the way that people had expectations of him in little daily interactions, this feeling that he couldn't shake the idea that people were making instantaneous judgments about him. And I will remind you that he is a rabbi, used to being at the front, used to being the voice and the face of a congregation, and he still felt this escalated scale of looking Jewish, that he was this exemplar, not just for his Jewish community, but for the entire Jewish people, and he was not comfortable with it. And after I listened to him share this reflection, I asked him, "Did you manage to taste the sweet part of it too?" And he said, "No, I don't understand what you mean." And that broke my heart. That broke my heart. And that's actually what I want to focus on tonight, is the sweetness. The particular sweetness that happens when you quote-unquote look Jewish. I want to tell you a little bit about my vacation I just took to Prince Edward Island, and 3 little interactions I had that happened because of being identifiably Jewish. On our first full day on the island, we were at a lovely playground in North Rustico. It was rainy and it was drizzly, and so in the brief few moments when the sky cleared out, we took a family walk down to the boardwalk, and my little girl, who's in the back of the room right now, and who will be 3 in just a few weeks, decided she really wanted to play on the slides. And so as she was going down, I heard, "Shalom." And I turned and I saw an older couple walking towards me with big smiles on their faces, and who were also clearly a little bit nervous. I smiled back, "Shalom," and they grinned. They said, "We were eating in that restaurant right over there, and we saw your kippah, and we wanted to come over and say hi, because we read that there are only around 70 Jewish people on the island, and we didn't expect to see anyone. It's really exciting." And as our conversation continued, it dawned on me that my new friends were also Jewish tourists, and they had mistaken me for one of PEI's very few local Jews. And I smiled gently and I said, oh, yes, I read that too. We're actually visiting from Toronto. I felt terrible. You could actually feel a little bit of their excitement drain away. But we still chatted on for a little while. They were from the Carolinas and were regular attendees at their small shul. They were up a few days before the season really kicked off, and yes, they were so excited to go to the theater, and no, they couldn't believe that Anne of Green Gables had gone biannually and that they wouldn't have the chance to see it. And as we departed, I rolled over all the subtext of that little interaction, and in a place where they were told, you know, there really aren't any other Jews. Seeing another Jew was so enticing to them that they ended their meal, they walked across a wet field into a children's playground just to chat with a complete and total stranger. We are a funny people, but that is the absolute sweetness of family, of mishpacha, of never being alone, no matter where you ever find yourself. The very next day, the sun came out, and it was time to fulfill the promise that I had made to just about everyone who I had told we were going to PEI, and I had to now take my family to Cow's ice cream. We headed to the Charlottetown Harbor and got into line with everyone else who had the brilliant idea of, on the sunny day, to go get ice cream. And now, waffle cones in hand and novelty t-shirt purchased, we went over to the waterfront, and I watched the bright purple jellyfish gently float in the harbor as my toddler attacked her unicorn-inspired ice cream. And moments later, bellies full of ice cream that really does live up to the hype, by the way, we just took a little wander, and I stayed outside the shops with Sela to clean her up. And once again, I heard, "Shalom." And I turned around for the second time in as many days, and there was a man in his late 50s or perhaps early 60s, once again kind of shyly staring at me. "Shalom," I replied. And he said with a smile, "Oh, you from the island?" And I said, "Nope. We live in Toronto." And he said, "Ah, we're from Kingston." And then, from nowhere, he proceeds to share his life story with me. He's a brand new grandfather on a trip of 3 generations to see the island, and his mother isn't Jewish, and neither is his wife, but he still grew up at the shul, and it was really the only way he knew to be. And then I got distracted because on his forearm, right here, was a tattoo of biblical Hebrew, and he got embarrassed. And he said, I know I'm not supposed to have this," he says, pointing to the tattoo of biblical Hebrew, "but it reminds me where I'm from. And we never really fit in at the synagogue with no Jewish mom and all." And I nodded, and I said, I really wish they had made you feel like you belonged. And he got wistful and said, "Me too. It's all anyone really wants, And at that moment, his son and his grandson arrived and distracted him and interrupted us, and that was also the perfect moment because that was the moment my lovely bride exited the shop. And I said, "Well, have a great rest of your vacation, and mazel tov on the new baby." And he brightly waved at me, and we went along our ways, families in tow. And we're a funny people to walk up to someone and share our broken hearts with the strangers who aren't really strangers. And days later, sitting at the airport, getting ready to come home, I am doing exactly what most parents of young children do at airports. I am desperately trying to entertain my girl, so as I will not be that person and that family, making everyone else's travel experience awful. And we're lucky. She's a great flyer. So we're sitting, and we're talking about vacation. I say, "Well, did you have a good fun on your vacation?" She says, "Yes, but I want to go home." "Okay, we're going home." "I miss my house." "Okay, baby, well, we're going to our house." "I miss my school." "Okay, well, tomorrow's the last day of school." "I miss my Shabbat songs." That is the exact noise I heard from directly behind me. The woman directly behind me turns around and says, "Okay, I just have to let you know That melted my heart. Did she say she misses her Shabbat songs? And so she and Rabbi Barishel get to talking, because I'm still in taking care of the baby mode. And sure enough, as we get on to call to the boarding, to get on the plane, the lady behind us gives that big wave and says, Shabbat Shalom. And it's Wednesday, but it's good. And I feel this grand surge of nachas, because I'm not the only one who is obviously being Jewish and obviously making connections. It's my whole family. We are a funny people, because every once in a while we just peek up our heads and wave when we notice other people just like us and the sweet little sparks of God that we're sending out into the world. 3 sweet stories, all of which come from this idea of looking Jewish. And because I would hate to be misunderstood, I do very much hope that the message you are hearing from me tonight is, now y'all should go out and wear a kippah. Or, there are more Jews on PEI than you thought. The message I really hope you're hearing tonight is looking Jewish and taking pride in Judaism is actually beautiful. It's a beautiful, meaningful, affirming thing. And we often lean into it when things are bad. But there are so many moments of goodness and light that it can enrich as well. Looking Jewish does not have to be a thing we only do in the face of anti-Semitism. Being proudly Jewish is a way of being that can just live in our everyday lives and in the actions that we take on and the way that we enrich the lives around us. And it can happen everywhere and anywhere we go. It brings strangers in close, our strange family, who are not really strangers. So for me, looking Jewish this trip reminded me of that valuable lesson, that our people's shared love for who we are, for who each other are as part of this big old family, for our God and for our tradition, it can surprise you, and it can also inspire you in the most unexpected of places.